Tonight, our first topic is the life of Catherine the Great, the German princess who became Russia's most powerful and most scandalous empress. From staging a coup against her own husband to chasing Enlightenment ideals while ruling with an iron fist. Catherine's story is all about sharp wit, endless ambition, notorious love affairs, and sweeping reforms. So before you get too comfy, as usual, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you actually like what we do, of course. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. Sometimes our stories get too exciting, and we have to throw in some snooze-worthy ones just to balance things out. Time to turn off the lights, crank the fan for some white noise, and dive into tonight's show. She was born Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Dornberg on May 10th, 1729, in a quiet corner of the Holy Roman Empire. Her family was noble, sure, but the modest kind, small-time German nobility, well-connected but power-poor, living comfortably but far from lavish. Her dad was a Prussian officer. Mom was ambitious and sharp, always dreaming of boosting their status through smart marriages from a young age. Sophie felt a burning hunger to climb the social ladder, and she planned to use that hunger like a weapon. She wasn't born to rule. No whispers of destiny followed her in Germany. But she was smart, curious, unusually calm, and obsessed with learning. She picked up languages easily, devoured books, and watched court behavior with hawk-like focus. Her world was small, but her mind wandered far from the cold halls of Zerbst. Then, at 14, surprise, Empress Elizabeth of Russia, childless and looking for an heir, chose a successor, her grandnephew Peter of Holstein-Gottorp, another German noble. But Peter needed a bride, and Elizabeth wanted someone easy to shape. Sophie was picked overnight. Her world flipped. Russia wasn't just any country. It was a vast, weird empire, and soon it would be her home. The journey ahead, long and cold. Sophie arrived in Russia as a foreigner, barely speaking Russian, no Orthodox faith, and carrying only her old name. But she didn't hesitate. She converted to Orthodoxy, took the name Catherine Alexeyeva, and studied Russian day and night until she spoke it better than Peter. She adapted, changed herself, wiped out any trace of resistance. Her mom said she was too serious. The courtiers said she was too quiet. But Catherine was watching everyone, especially her future husband. She saw Peter as a kid stuck in a man's body, immature, clumsy, more into toy soldiers than diplomacy or love. And with that cold realization, Catherine took her first silent vow. If Peter could inherit a throne, so could she. She appeared like a seductive wild card in someone else's game, but things were starting to move, and Catherine planned to become empress. The royal wedding went exactly as expected, grand, symbolic, politically useful, but for Catherine, it was the start of a long, icy winter. Her husband Peter wasn't exactly Prince Charming, immature, awkward, emotionally stunted. He barely cared about his bride. He spent more time marching toy soldiers on tables than handling court affairs or romance. Sometimes he looked more like a kid playing emperor than a man destined to rule one of the world's biggest empires. Still, Catherine played her part perfectly. She smiled on cue, dressed elegantly, watched everything, especially what shouldn't become. She quickly realized that to survive in the Russian court, she had to rely on her brains, not her marriage. She showed up like some porn star cameo in someone else's game, But then things started rolling, and Catherine planned to be queen. The royal wedding happened just as expected, grand, iconic, politically useful, but for Catherine, it was also the start of a long, freezing winter. Her husband, Peter, wasn't exactly Prince Charming. Immature, awkward, and emotionally stunted, Peter couldn't care less about his bride. He spent more time parading toy soldiers on the table than handling court affairs or romance. Sometimes he looked more like a kid playing emperor than a man destined to rule one of the world's biggest empires. Still, Catherine played her part so perfectly. She smiled at just the right moments, dressed super classy, watched everything, especially what shouldn't happen. She quickly realized if she wanted to survive in the Russian court, she'd have to rely on her brain, not her marriage. So, she started building a life of the mind, read like a maniac, hiding books under her pillow, pulling all-nighters, history, philosophy, the works of Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire became her secret tutors. She wrote letters, kept diaries, and began shaping her own vision of what a ruler could be: a leader who used power not for cruelty or pampering, but for progress, justice, and reform. In a palace full of backstabbing, Catherine was quietly turning dangerous, but danger usually cuts both ways. The court was a total snake pit. Spies lurked in the halls. Alliances flipped overnight. Even Catherine's health took a nosedive. Rumor had it Peter hated her guts. He even refused his medicine and nearly died. She bounced back, but never forgot. So Catherine started building her own crookey nobles, military officers, even her personal dog. She learned which words to say, which to keep quiet, and which to whisper behind locked doors. And as her marriage cooled off, she turned to others for affection. Lovers slipped into her life quietly, along with influence, protection, and sometimes love. But love, yeah, that wasn't on her to-do list. Power was. Peter was still the heir, but Catherine wasn't about to be his shadow anymore. She'd tasted survival politics, the thrill of forbidden texts, and the sweet innocence of ambition. She wasn't just queen in name, she was queen by choice. When Queen Elizabeth died in 1762, Peter III took the throne. Catherine, now over 30, had spent more than a decade in the shadows, reading, learning, and getting ready. But her husband was still as unpredictable and unpopular as ever. In just a few short months, Peter pissed off the Russian Orthodox Church, offended the nobles, and pulled troops out of a winning war against Prussia, his homeland's ally but Russia's enemy. His loyalty to Frederick the Great enraged the army. Mocking Russian traditions made the court furious, and Catherine, she watched it all quietly, carefully. She started building a silent network of loyalists, men like Gregory Olaf, a dashing military officer, and her lover, who was tight with the royal guard. Olaf wasn't just a romantic partner, he was her power key. Behind palace walls, Catherine whispered her plans. So she made promises, swore oaths. She had no legal claim to the throne, but she had something way stronger: the confidence of the sword holders. Then the moment came. On the morning of June 28th, 1762, while Peter was distracted and clueless, Catherine made her move. She rode to the Izmaelski regiment barracks, faced the soldiers, and declared herself ruler of Russia. They swore loyalty right then and there, one by one: guards, Nobles, even clergy, followed her lead. She rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, calm and majestic. The people didn't rise up against her. They cheered as Peter ran off. Days later, he was forced to abdicate. Shortly after, he died, killed under shady circumstances, probably on Catherine's allies' orders. She never admitted to ordering it, but she never denied benefiting from it. When asked about his death, she just said she didn't need him anymore. It was a nearly bloodless coup, no popular uprising, no civil war, just a perfect power handoff from one ruler to another. Catherine pulled off the impossible. A foreign-born woman snatched Russia's throne without her, without majority support, and without breaking a sweat. Her reign was official, but now came the hard part. Proving she deserved it, she had the crown. Now she had to earn it. Catherine got something few rulers of her time understood. Power wasn't just about military control or royal blood. It was about image, and once she had the crown, she didn't rest. She changed. From a monarch, she turned herself. Image. And once she snagged the crown, there was no more rest. She changed. From a monarch, she turned into a reformer, an Enlightenment scholar, a visionary queen. She thought of herself as a philosopher on the throne, exchanging letters with Voltaire, Diderot, and Europe's other big thinkers. To them, she wasn't just a queen. She was proof that ideas could shape an empire. She invited philosophers to court, funded scholars, openly praised freedom, education, and reason, all while ruling with unmatched power. But those ideas didn't always fit. The reality in Russia was still a hardcore feudal society. The nobles held the land, and the peasants' serfdom chained millions to poverty. Catherine wanted to fix that. She dreamed of modernizing the legal system, improving schools, and wiping out corruption in the bureaucracy. In 1767, she called up a committee to draft a new legal code, one that was fair, sensible, and humane. She personally wrote the nakaz, or instructions, a bold Enlightenment document condemning torture, championing education, and stressing equality before the law. European thinkers praised it as visionary, but back home, the committee failed miserably. The nobles weren't about to give up their perks. The clergy hated the secular ideas, and Catherine, ever the realist, backed off. She wasn't about to start a civil war in the name of idealism. She shelved many reforms, but never gave up the image of a reformer. Still, some changes did take hold. She expanded education, especially for girls. She founded the Smolny Institute, the first state-funded school for noblewomen in Russia. She poured resources into the arts, opening theaters, libraries, and museums. Under her reign, St. Petersburg became a cultural and elegant hub. She was building an enlightened Russia, not with force, but inspiration. But her enlightenment was a delicate dance. She had to keep the nobles loyal, the peasants quiet, and impress the philosophers. She walked a tightrope between progress and tradition, idealism and power. Catherine spoke the language of freedom, but ruled with the discipline of a king. And behind every public ideal was a meticulously calculated strategy. With her smarts and discipline, Catherine could never escape one thing everyone's obsession with: her private life. In the glittering palaces of the Russian court, where whispers spread faster than truths. The Empress's lovers became legends. Her first great romance after the coup was with Grigory Orlov, the soldier who helped her seize power. Brave, loyal, and handsome. Orlov wasn't just a romantic partner, he was her partner in crime. Together, they reshaped Russia's future, but over time, their relationship faded. Orlov's behavior got erratic, and Catherine, ever the rational one, started looking elsewhere. Next came a string of long-term affairs, each carefully chosen. These weren't reckless flings. Catherine's lovers were often talented, smart, or militarily valuable men. They were part of her political ecosystem. Some were skilled administrators, others were generals, and Grigory Potemkin would become the most important. Potemkin wasn't this court favorite. He was smart, passionate, and ambitious. Their love burned fiercely, and though it didn't last forever, their political alliance lasted a lifetime. Potemkin helped Catherine defend Crimea, expand Russia's borders, and shape foreign policy. They might have even secretly married, though no proof has ever been found. Even after feelings blossomed, they kept writing to each other regularly. Warm, witty, and often intimate letters full of mutual admiration, yet the court and the continent kept gossiping. Foreign ambassadors nervously reported the long list of her lovers. Pamphlets in Europe painted her as immoral, depraved, even dangerous. One bizarre rumor, totally false, claimed she died trying to have sex with a horse. Yep, really. That was pure slander, weaponized misogyny, aimed at punishing a woman who ruled with power and seduction. Catherine never responded directly to these attacks. She didn't have to. Her rule spoke louder than any whisper. She seized and held the throne of Russia. She expanded territory, reformed institutions, and ruled with unmatched efficiency. Sure, she loved fiercely, but never stupidly. Her love life might have rocked the old world, but for Catherine, love was just another political arena where loyalty was tested, passion was useful, and hearts could be as strategic as armies. She often talked about freedom, justice, enlightenment. But behind the silks and parlors, behind witty letters to Voltaire and progressive speeches, was a ruler who knew power's price and how to hold on to it. In 1773, just over a decade after she took the throne, Russia exploded. A guy named Yemelyan Pugachev, a Cossack fighter and veteran, claimed he was none other than Peter III, Catherine's long-dead hubby. He called her a usurper, a promised land for peasants, freedom for the waves. He sparked a wildfire across the countryside, where pain and anger had been simmering for ages. This was the Pugachev Rebellion, the biggest peasant uprising in Russian history. Catherine shivered but hit back hard. The army was deployed. Villages were burned to ashes. Rebels were caught, tortured, and hanged. Pugachev himself was paraded through Moscow in a cage before his execution. With his death, Catherine sent a crystal-clear message: challenge the throne, and you'll suffer. This was a turning point. The queen who once fought for the people's rights now ruled in a way that was way less idealistic. She'd seen chaos up close, and it scared her. The rebellion exposed deep cracks in her empire: poverty, inequality, despair. But instead of fixing those wounds with reform, she tightened her grip. Serfdom expanded under her reign. The nobles' privileges were beefed up. Poor peasants fell deeper into slavery to keep the peace. Catherine sided with the nobles because they held the keys to her survival, but contradictions haunted her reign to Europe. She was the enlightened monarch, the modernizer, the arts and science patron, but at home, she grew harsher, more pompous, less idealistic. The woman who once dreamed of rewriting Russian law now issued decrees that reinforced the status quo. But maybe that was her genius. Catherine had learned what many idealists never do to keep power in a turbulent world. Sometimes you gotta betray the very ideas that got you there. She wore philosophy like a crown, but inside was steel. If Catherine ruled Russia with vision, she expanded it with precision. Unlike many kings who only dreamed of defending borders, she dreamed of expanding them. Her Russia wouldn't just be a landmass, it would be an empire with raw influence, culture, and geopolitical muscle. She looked south, first at the Black Sea and the fading Ottoman Empire. Controlling Crimea meant warm water ports, new trade routes, and strategic dominance. The wars dragged on and drained resources, but Catherine's army, partly led by her trusty advisor, Gregory Potemkin, kept fighting. By 1783, Crimea was annexed. Russia now had direct access to the Black Sea and a seat at the table with the naval powers. Then she turned west. Poland, torn apart by internal conflicts and weakened after centuries of political drama, became her next target. Catherine positioned herself as Poland's stability guardian while secretly pulling strings to divide and conquer. In 3 partitions of Poland, she teamed up with Austria and Prussia to carve up the country. By the final partition in 1795, Poland vanished as an independent state. A once mighty kingdom was sliced and diced, with most of eastern lands landing in Catherine's lap. This was ruthless, cold, calculated, and effective diplomacy. Under her rule, Russia's borders expanded. Centuries of political backstabbing became her next focus. Catherine positioned herself as the protector of Poland's stability while secretly plotting to divide and conquer. In 3 partitions of Poland, she teamed up with Austria and Prussia to carve up the country. By the final partition in 1795, Poland as an independent nation vanished. A once mighty kingdom was chopped up, and most of its eastern lands went to Catherine. This was ruthless, cold, calculated, and effective diplomacy under her reign. Russia's borders expanded by over 200,000 square miles. Millions of new subjects were added: Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Tatars, Jews. The Russian Empire had never been so huge or diverse, but expansion came with a price. The new territories were tough to manage. Some resisted Russian control, others demanded autonomy. The empire grew heavier and harder to control. Catherine responded with reforms, reorganizing provinces, launched new schools, and tried to standardize the whole bureaucracy. Basically, a bureaucratic race against chaos. But through it all, Catherine kept her cool. She framed her conquests not as imperial invasions, but as the march of civilization. She wrote letters to European leaders like she was spreading Enlightenment ideals, not swallowing nations whole. To her allies, she was a savvy female politician. To her enemies, a ruthless predator. But to history, she's something rarer, a ruler who expanded her empire not through reckless war, but with clever strategy and diplomatic finesse. With every annexation, Russia didn't just grow bigger, it grew bolder as Catherine aged. The fire in her mind never died, but her body started slowing down. She stayed active in government, reading reports, drafting reforms, and showing up at court events well into her 60s. But the world around her was changing fast. Revolutionary vibes were spreading all over Europe. In 1789, the French Revolution exploded, shaking courts everywhere. Kings lost their heads. Crowds demanded liberty and equality for a queen who once chased Enlightenment ideals. This rebellion was seriously unsettling. Catherine, formerly pals with philosophers, now saw their words as dangerous sparks. She banned French revolutionary texts and tightened censorship. Her court, once open to new ideas, turned suspicious and wary. Looks like her Enlightenment glow had an expiration date. She grew more isolated. 2. The love of her life, Potemkin, died in 1791. Their bond had shifted from love to politics long ago, but his death hit her hard. She kept leaning on younger men she favored, charming, loyal, but rarely as strategically sharp as her old comrades. Then there was her son, Paul. Catherine didn't trust him. She saw none of her smarts or steadiness in him. He was emotional, impulsive, and attracted to autocratic ideals that clashed with her more balanced style. She even considered skipping him entirely to groom her grandson Alexander as the next Tsar. Bold plan, but she never got the chance. In November 1796, Catherine suffered a massive stroke. She never woke up again. A few days later, she died alone in her chambers, with unfinished reforms on her desk and unspoken thoughts in her journal. When Paul took the throne, his first move was to scrap many of his mother's policies. He buried her in Peter's cemetery, right next to the husband she had overthrown and might have had killed. In death, they were united in stone, though never in life. The court mourned her, the country paused, and Europe witnessed the passing of one of its most fascinating rulers. Catherine the Great ruled for 34 years. She left behind a bigger, stronger Russia and a legacy that's still controversial centuries later. But her final chapter was written in silence. Catherine the Great was never meant to rule. She wasn't Russian by birth. She wasn't born to inherit the throne, yet through intelligence, political savvy, and ruthless determination, she became one of Russia's longest reigning monarchs. Her legacy is complicated, full of contradictions that history is still untangling. She spoke the language of the Enlightenment. She wrote about justice, reason, and reform. She collaborated with the greatest minds of her time, trying to inject their ideals into one of the most autocratic empires in the world. But when those ideals threatened her power, she crushed them. She dreamed of unleashing waves of change, but ended up expanding her control. She talked about equality, but ruled with absolute power. Still, her influence can't be denied. She modernized Russia's administration, making it more efficient, sharper focus, and more capable. She brought schools, hospitals, and art to cities that previously only knew military parades and church ceremonies. Under her rule, Russia didn't just get stronger, it got richer and way more respected on the world stage. She ruled a man's world and beat the men at their own game. Her court was full of powerful advisors and lovers, but don't get it twisted, Catherine was always the one calling the shots. Every relationship, every policy, Every letter she wrote was part of her grand master plan. She turned St. Petersburg into the shining beacon of European culture. She expanded the empire's borders beyond anyone's wildest dreams and left behind libraries, monuments, and institutions bearing her name long after she was gone. But maybe her biggest legacy wasn't land or law, it was capability. Catherine proved a woman could rule an empire, that charm, brains, and sheer willpower could take a little princess all the way to global heavyweight. She shattered every expectation, not with rebellion, but with finesse, not with noise, but with calculation. To some, she's still the poster child for despotism. To others, she's the goddess of reason. But to history, she's something even bigger than legend. Something real, a flawed, brilliant, ruthless human who ruled for over 30 years and left her mark on civilization itself. Catherine the Great didn't just reign. She rewrote the script on what any ruler could be. Long before it was a city, El Dorado was a man, a king, they said, dusted head to toe in fine gold. He stood on a floating raft in a sacred lake, surrounded by priests and nobles. At sunrise, he'd toss jewelry, emeralds, and gold offerings into the water to honor the gods. It was a ceremony, a legend, a whisper on the wind. The native Muisca people, who lived where modern Colombia is now, called him El Hombre Dorado, the Golden Man. But when the Spanish invaders showed up in the early 1500s, they totally misunderstood. They'd heard of El Dorado, but didn't think of a ceremony or a man. Nope. They imagined a place, a golden kingdom, hidden in the mountains, untouched by war, sparkling with treasure. The transformation was quick in European minds. El Dorado went from a man to a city, then a kingdom, then a whole empire. The name meant more than gold. It meant paradise, salvation, a place where every wish came true. And for the hungry, desperate Spanish thousands of miles from home, that was downright irresistible. The South American jungles buzzed with rumors. Deep in that unknown green, a city of gold awaited. The natives spoke carefully, often trying to soothe or trick their aggressive visitors. They mentioned distant lands, strange rivers, and glittering treasures. The monarchists, hungry for wealth and glory, clung to every word like clues. El Dorado wasn't just a legend. It became a fever. Through campfires and letters home, the story grew bigger. Soldiers who hadn't even left Spain heard it. Poets romanticized it. Kings funded expeditions. Whether it existed or not didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the belief that it could, and belief during the age of conquest was all you needed. This golden illusion could lift some to greatness and others to madness. It became one of the most powerful legends in exploration history, the promise of untouchable wealth, always deep in the jungle, always just beyond the next mountain range. El Dorado wasn't just a story anymore. It was a compass that never really pointed anywhere, and they kept chasing it. Kings funded these expeditions. Whether they actually existed didn't really matter anymore. What mattered was the belief that they could, and belief in the age of conquest is all you need. This golden illusion could push some to greatness and others to madness. It became one of the strongest legends in exploration history, the promise of untouchable riches, always deep in the jungle, always just beyond the next mountain range. El Dorado was no longer a story. It was a compass that never really led anywhere, and they kept chasing it. In 1541, a brutal expedition left Quito, led by Gonzalo Pizarro, Francisco Pizarro's infamous brother. The conqueror of the Inca Empire, Gonzalo had heard rumors of cinnamon forests, lands rich in gold, and a golden city named El Dorado just beyond the Andes. He was hell-bent on finding it, no matter the cost. He took over 300 Spanish soldiers, hundreds of native porters, a few dozen horses, and a dream filled with gold and desperation. But the jungle was no dream. It was a full-blown nightmare. Rain poured like it had a personal grudge, non-stop for days. Rivers swelled and swallowed their supplies whole. Bugs ate their skin alive. Men broke down from exhaustion, hunger, and disease. Weeks dragged into months, and the expedition started falling apart. Food vanished, spirits crashed, many native porters died or ran off. The Spanish, weighed down in armor and useless weapons against the jungle, grew weak and paranoid. Gonzalo Pizarro, desperate and probably losing his mind, ordered a smaller group ahead to find food and a way forward. This crew was led by Francisco de Orellana, a little-known noble who accidentally made history. Orellana's group drifted down a river, following its winding path deeper into the unknown. Days passed, then weeks, and Orellana realized he couldn't turn back upstream to reunite with Pizarro. Only one way forward remained, with a small crew and a makeshift raft. Orellana continued down the river we now call the Amazon. He passed through vast, seemingly endless forests, and stumbled upon native civilizations that looked way more advanced than anyone expected. Then he claimed to have seen big cities, well-organized societies, and even warrior women tribes, the stuff that fueled the El Dorado legend for centuries. Eventually, Orellana reached the Atlantic Ocean. He became the first European to navigate the entire Amazon River, but found no gold or El Dorado, just a continent-spanning myth. Back in the Andes, Gonzalo Pizarro's forces were nearly wiped out. The survivors crawled back to Quito, exhausted and starving, but the damage was done. The jungle had truly spilled blood for El Dorado, and the legend was just getting started. By the mid-1500s, the Spanish obsession with El Dorado shifted from the vast unknown jungle to a single haunted spot, Lake Guatavita, nestled in today's lush Colombian highlands. This nearly perfect volcanic crater lake sparkled with eerie beauty, but it wasn't the view that drew treasure hunters. It was the legend. The nearby Muisca people had long performed sacred rituals here. One ceremony caught European imaginations: a naked, gold-covered chief paddling a raft into the lake's center, tossing emeralds, gold, and precious offerings into the water as gifts to the gods. To the Spanish, this wasn't religion, it was a vault, and they were determined to crack it open. In 1536, Bishop Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada was the first to arrive. His men dredged up some gold jewelry from the lake's edge, sparking just enough hope to keep the obsession alive. Over the next few decades, countless attempts were made to loot the supposed treasure at the lake's bottom. In one of the most infamous efforts, in 1580, a wealthy entrepreneur named Antonio de Sepulveda tried to drain the entire lake. He and a team of native workers dug a massive canal into the mountainside to let the water escape. As the water level dropped, mud and debris rose along with some gold fragments. But the lake's sides collapsed before the water could fully drain. The excavation killed many workers, and though some golden artifacts were found, the legendary treasure stayed buried under layers of mud and myth. Yet this attempt had a strange side effect. The lake itself became a sacred spot in the El Dorado legend. It wasn't just a backdrop anymore. It became the beating heart of the story, where gold had been offered for centuries, where secrets lay beneath the water, and where hope refused to die. Even centuries later, Lake Guatavita still more. It became the beating heart of the story, a place where gold had been offered for centuries, where secrets lay hidden, buried beneath the water, and a place where hope never dies. Even centuries later, Lake Guatavita still attracts treasure hunters armed with sonar gear, diving equipment, and explosives, but the lake stays stubborn. It keeps its secrets tight, and like the legend it fuels, it promises everything but delivers only echoes. By the late 16th century, the El Dorado fever had crossed the Atlantic. It was no longer just a Spanish obsession. Now, the ambitious English, rising and eager to challenge Spanish dominance, had their eyes on the city of gold, and nobody was getting drunk on that dream. With this legend, then Sir Walter Raleigh, a poet, soldier, and Queen Elizabeth I's favorite. Raleigh was bold, clever, and oozed stage charisma, but he also had fierce ambition, a burning desire to carve out a legacy that could rival the great conquistadors. He believed El Dorado wasn't just a myth, it was his destiny. In 1595, he sailed to Guyana, a thickly unmapped land near the Orinoco River in what's now Venezuela. He'd read Spanish reports, heard stories from captured natives, and convinced himself that the city of gold was somewhere in that wet, jungle interior. His journey was brutal through dense forests, unbearable heat, and treacherous terrain. But he came back with a showstopper of a tale. He claimed to have found a civilization, about to be discovered, a land rich in gold, ruled by a powerful emperor just out of reach. The documents he published revealed the vast Guyana Empire, wealthy and beautiful, filled with vague maps and tantalizing clues. No proof, mind you, but Raleigh's word was enough to ignite imaginations and charm England. Queen Elizabeth was deeply curious. The public was thrilled. The race turned legendary. But time marched on. Elizabeth died. Raleigh lost favor and freedom. Imprisoned in the Tower of London under King James the Bussards, yet El Dorado still haunted his mind. In 1617, after years behind bars, he got one last shot, a final expedition to Guyana to prove his claim. This time, everything fell apart. His men attacked a Spanish outpost, shattering the fragile peace between England and Spain. Worse, Wat, Raleigh's beloved son, died in the skirmish. Defeated, heartbroken, and empty-handed, Raleigh returned to England. King James was furious. Raleigh was executed in 1618, beheaded in public. His dream was crushed by the very legend he'd helped make famous. He chased a city that might never have existed, and in doing so, became its most tragic explorer. Centuries on, El Dorado refuses to die. Every failed expedition only makes this myth stronger, like a mirage that shines brighter the more you chase it. This vast, uncharted jungle became both a canvas and an executioner. Countless men risked everything to dive into that emerald abyss, convinced gold waited just beyond the next mountain, the next river, the next perfect day. They came from everywhere: Portuguese fortune hunters, German explorers, Dutch traders, Jesuit missionaries. Each carried stories, weapons, and dreams. few returned, fewer still returned sane. The Amazon rainforest, spanning millions of square kilometers, is one of Earth's harshest environments. Thick canopies block out sunlight. Rivers change course without warning. Venomous insects and snakes lurk in the leaves. Hunger claimed some lives. Disease took others. Those pushing deeper faced even greater threats. Indigenous tribes fiercely protected their lands, reacting swiftly, coordinated, and often fatally, time and again. The same pattern emerged: a promising lead, a well-funded expedition, weeks of struggle, then silence. Many were never seen again, yet the faith persisted, the legend evolved. El Dorado ceased to be just a single city. It became a floating dream. For some, it was hidden in the Andes; for others, deep in the jungle. Some imagined it in caves, others in lakes. It shifted with every explorer's hope. The threats were even bigger. Native tribes fiercely guarded their land, striking fast, coordinated, and often deadly. Time and again, the same pattern emerged. A promising clue, a well-funded expedition, weeks of struggle, then silence. Many never seen again, yet the faith stubbornly remained. The legend grew. El Dorado was no longer just one city. It became an elusive dream. For some, hidden in the Andes. For others, deep in the jungle. Some imagined it in caves, others in lakes. It changed shape with every explorer's hope, and that's exactly why it was so dangerous. The jungle needed no traps, no armies, just time. People drifted deeper, guided by hope and confusion, until they were spent. Some went mad, others turned on each other. The line between explorer and victim blurred until it vanished completely. Even with nothing found, survivors spoke of signs, fleeting glimpses of golden statues, distant lights, strange voices echoing at night. Their half-starved, half-delirious minds spun like compasses gone haywire, pointing every which way. El Dorado turned into a psychological maze, promising paradise but demanding everything in return. The jungle didn't protect a city of gold. It protected a story, and in that story, hope itself was the trap. For centuries, the legend of El Dorado was dismissed as nonsense, a greedy European fantasy born from misunderstanding and arrogance. But in recent decades, something interesting popped up. Evidence suggests maybe, just maybe, El Dorado wasn't a total fairy tale, not a city with walls of gold. Nope, not treasure-lined streets either, but signs of vast, advanced civilizations that once thrived right where so-called wilderness now swallows the land. Deep in the Amazon, archaeologists and scientists uncovered ruins of lost cities, agricultural systems, and sprawling road networks buried under thick jungle layers. In Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, satellite images and ground surveys revealed geometric earth mounds, planned towns, and complex irrigation channels. These weren't tiny tribal camps. They were organized societies, some housing tens of thousands of people. Then there's the soil, scattered across the Amazon. Researchers found terra preta, a rich, dark soil mixed with charcoal, bones, and manure. That's no accident. It was crafted, made by ancient Amazonians to turn barren land into fertile ground. It shows a sustainable civilization with way more environmental savvy than we ever gave them credit for. Maybe when early explorers talked about huge cities in the jungle, they were actually glimpsing the last sparks of a dying world. a civilization devastated by European diseases before they could fully understand it. Some folks believe that. Even Francisco de Orellana, whose Amazon journey was long dismissed as exaggeration, is getting a second look. His claims of bustling cities and powerful tribes were rejected for centuries, but new discoveries hint he might have told the truth, just a version Europe wasn't ready to swallow. Maybe El Dorado was never a single golden city, but a reflection of many real cities, a blend of thriving cultures that dazzled outsiders before vanishing into jungle and time. This legend didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was pieced together, misunderstood, and reshaped by conquest. Gold might have been symbolic, the grandeur exaggerated, but the story's roots were always real. El Dorado may not be a spot on any map, but it's definitely a memory. When the legend spread across Europe, it wasn't just in songs or campfire tales. It got carved onto maps. From the 16th to 18th centuries, cartographers and geographers working from stories, not science, started filling the blank spaces in South America with straight-up inventions. The unknown is scary, but also a blank canvas, and nothing fills that canvas better than gold on old parchment maps. El Dorado's name pops up in bold letters over lakes, rivers, and mountains that never existed. Sometimes the city is near Lake Guatavita. Other times it drifts deep into the Amazon or hides behind the Orinoco River. Some maps even show the whole Golden Empire, with buildings, sun temples, and mythical creatures guarding the way. These maps weren't made to trick people, not exactly. They were sales pitches. Every song was a siren call for kings, merchants, and mercenaries. They sparked funding for expeditions, justified foreign land grabs, gave explorers something real enough to chase. The problem, no proof, the less certain the location, stuffed into the royal palace. Other works were published as books, passed hand to hand by dreamers chasing riches and miracles. They got copied, plagiarized, jazzed up, and each new edition piled on more details, more certain, more enticing. These geographic blunders had real consequences. Expeditions were launched based on that nonsense. Lives were lost chasing twists and turns of rivers that didn't even exist. Entire regions were invaded based on legends scribbled down by men who'd never set foot outside Europe. But here's the kicker. Some of these maps kept circulating long after El Dorado's glory days were dead. Why? Because people don't just give up hope easily. A map isn't just a tool, it's a promise. And promises, well, they have a way of coming true. To this day, those ancient maps are collectors' treasures, not because they're accurate, but because they capture a moment when faith beat evidence. El Dorado never needed to be real. Just drawing it was enough. Centuries passed. The jungle swallowed bones, rusty swords, and the silent footprints of those chasing El Dorado. And even now, the legend lives on. It's alive in books, movies, and museum exhibits. In cartoons we show kids, and documentaries we binge late into the night. This is Indiana Jones and the Road to El Dorado. It's more than a city, more than a man. It's an idea. Even in the 19th and 20th centuries, explorers kept heading back to South America, armed with compasses, rifles, and scientific curiosity. Alexander von Humboldt, one of the most respected scientists of his time, ventured through South America in the early 1800s, Though skeptical, even he got sucked into those tales. He wasn't hunting gold, but truth, and found jungles still whispering secrets of hidden civilizations. Then there was Percy Fawcett, the British explorer obsessed with a lost city in the Amazon. He called it Zia, echoing old dreams of El Dorado. In 1925, he and his son disappeared into the jungle and never came back. Some say he died at the hands of a tribe. Others think he found something and chose to disappear. And even in the 21st century, the search isn't over. Armed with satellite images, drones, and LiDAR tech, archaeologists keep uncovering evidence of a complex ancient Amazonian civilization. No golden city found, but new ruins, earthen forts, and settlement grids suggest the heart of the jungle, once beat with a life far richer than anyone imagined. Still, El Dorado shines not on the ground, but in our minds, because we don't really need proof. We need the chase, the idea that somewhere out there, there's more, the ultimate secrets still unrevealed, that if we go far enough, try hard enough, risk enough, we'll find something that could change everything. El Dorado stopped being a real place long ago. It's a metaphor for ambition, obsession, the human hunger for what's just beyond the horizon. We chase it in careers, relationships, dreams, and sometimes deep in the jungle. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. What matters is moving forward. In the end, El Dorado was never found. No gilded city, no palace walls sparkling in the sun, no emerald-carved thrones. The jungle never gave up its secrets, yet El Dorado's legacy outlasts the kingdoms that hunted it, because what the explorers didn't realize, what they couldn't see, was the real treasure was never gold. It was what the journey revealed about themselves, about civilization, and about the stories we cling to. They found rivers no map had ever marked. They met people with knowledge of the forest, rivaling any, kingdoms chasing after it, because what explorers didn't realize, what they just couldn't see was, the real treasure was never gold. It was what the journey revealed about themselves, about civilization, and the stories we cling to. They found rivers no map had ever marked. They met people with forest knowledge rivaling any European academy. They recorded languages, plants, and customs the Western world had never seen before. Some, like Francisco de Orellana, accidentally made history not by finding El Dorado, but by opening a path into the heart of the Earth's largest rainforest. Others lost everything, wealth, sanity, their lives, but they too became part of the legend. Their names echo through time, not because of what they found, but because of what they were willing to risk. El Dorado survives because it taps into something deep inside us, the belief that there's always more, more to discover, more to become, more just beyond the horizon. We see it in every project, every wild dream, entrepreneurs chasing the perfect idea, artists hunting the perfect masterpiece, travelers searching for the world's last wild corners. Each person, in their own way, chases a golden city that might not even exist, but still shapes everything they do. This legend isn't failure, it's a mirror. It reflects our ambition, curiosity, and yes, our greed. It shows how far we'll go for something beautiful, something meaningful, something whispering quietly. Just one more step. El Dorado isn't a lost city, it's a question, and every generation answers it their own way. So next time you hear a story too good to be true, ask yourself, is it a lie or a dream worth chasing? Because sometimes El Dorado really is the journey itself. The origin of the Olympics wasn't about records or titles. It was about reverence. Back in 776 BC, deep in ancient Greece's cradle, across mountains and valleys, people gathered not to fight, not to trade, but to worship. They came to a sacred spot called Olympia, nestled in the lush Peloponnesian Peninsula. No city here, just a religious sanctuary, shaded by olive trees and watched over by gods carved in marble. The point to honor Zeus, king of the gods, through rituals, sacrifices, and the physical excellence of mortal humans. The Olympic Games weren't born on a stadium, but at an altar, an ancient ash mound built from generations of burnt offerings, before a race kicked off. Before a discus flew through the air, sacrifices had to be made. Bulls were led to the altar. Incense was burned. Hymns were sung. The first Olympics were basically a big devotion ceremony. Only free Greek men were allowed to compete. Only citizens. They came to represent their city-states like Athens, Corinth, Argos, and Sparta. Each athlete wasn't just racing for himself. He ran for his hometown, wearing hometown pride like a cloak. No stands, no announcers, no global audience. But the vibe was buzzing. With something sacred, Olympia became a crossroads where language, politics, and rivalry paused, even if just for a few days. And Greeks remembered they were one people under the gods' protection, so from all over Greek lands. They came here with bare feet and sun-kissed skin, some walking weeks just to be part of that moment. Competing wasn't just allowed, it was sacred. It was the way to get closer to the divine, to challenge the human body as the gods intended, strong, focused, and shameless. No gold, no silver, just honor. No empire demanded this gathering. No king issued a decree. The games came from somewhere deeper, something woven into Greek identity's soul. Here, beneath temple shadows, witnessed by Zeus himself. The Olympic Games were born not as sport, but as a sacred ritual in a land often torn apart by rivalry and endless war. It's pretty remarkable that every 4 years, Greeks found a reason to stop fighting. That reason was Zeus. Before each Olympics began, messengers were sent from Elis, the region guarding Olympia, to announce Ekacheria, the sacred truce. This wasn't a polite suggestion. It was a serious, binding agreement. For a month, sometimes 3, all wars across the Greek world had to stop. No armies could march. No soldier could draw his sword. Even hostile borders got temporarily open, letting athletes, priests, and spectators roam free. A truce doesn't mean peace. Between city-states, anyway. It means respecting something way bigger than politics, the gods, in theory. It lets athletes from anywhere in Greek world, friend or foe, safely show up in Olympia. In practice, it's a diplomatic miracle. City-states that just fought last season could stand side by side at the starting line next season. Even Sparta, with all its pride and general-level attitude, mostly stuck to the truce during its early history. Breaking the truce, that's basically inviting divine wrath. The punishment wasn't just from other city-states, but straight from the gods themselves. Zeus wasn't just the protector of the games. He was their witness. At Olympia, a giant bronze statue of Zeus stands holding a lightning bolt, silently reminding everyone the god's rules are non-negotiable. But the truce wasn't just about safety, it was about unity. Greece wasn't a country. It was a patchwork of fiercely independent cops who loved to fight each other, yet through a sacred treaty. They could gather at one place for one goal, bonded by shared reverence. It wasn't just political necessity, it was symbolic. The truce taught that even in a world full of conflict, moments of order, respect, and ritual could exist. For a little while, Greek identity rose above rivalry as olive wreaths were prepared and athletes stepped into the arena. A peaceful hush filled the air, not because soldiers enforced it, but because the gods commanded it. At Olympia, no uniforms, no fancy robes, no armor. Ancient Greek athletes competed naked, totally bare and on purpose. To us modern folks, that's shocking, but to the Greeks, a naked body wasn't something to hide. It was something to celebrate. Strength, symmetry, discipline weren't just physical traits. They reflected virtue, the soul made visible. Competing nude wasn't just allowed. Predictably, it was part of the ritual. Gymnos in Greek means naked. From that came gymnasiums, training grounds, and eventually gyms. Training the body was training the mind. Athletes rubbed olive oil on themselves, not for vanity but to show off and reduce friction during movement. They often dusted oil with powder to prevent slipping and highlight their muscles. In this sacred setting, the human form became art, and it wasn't just about looks. Nude competition symbolized equality. On the field, wealth and social rank were stripped away literally. What remained was effort, discipline, and raw physical skill. The body was the only uniform, and excellence was the only rank. But this exposure also had a moral meaning. For Greeks, shame wasn't about nudity but cowardice, cheating, or weakness. Stepping onto the track, the wrestling ring, or the javelin line naked was a statement. I've got nothing to hide. It was a transparent, bold gesture. Athletes put themselves before the gods and their people with full honesty. Sculptures from this era reflect that respect. Statues of runners, discus throwers, and wrestlers, often idealized, weren't just decorations. They symbolized heroic spirit, immortalized in marble for generations to study and admire. Even gods like Apollo and Heracles appeared as heroic nude figures. Of course, women weren't just banned from competing, they weren't even allowed to watch. Only unmarried girls could spectate, and that was rare. The Olympic space was totally male, sacred. Only unmarried girls were allowed to watch, and even that was rare. The Olympic space was all men, sacred, open, and fiercely competitive. In this setting, nakedness wasn't rude, it was awesome. Nude athletes stood there like living sacrifices, bodies honed, tested, transformed, not just for glory but for Zeus's favor. At the very first Olympic Games, there was no second chance, only one winner. No silver medals, no podiums with 3 tiers. The Greeks believed excellence was unique. Victory was absolute. So in every event, there was only the first place athlete got the glory. They received a simple but sacred prize, a wreath made from wild olive leaves, snipped from a sacred tree near the temple of Zeus. This olive wreath, called a kotanos, had 0 cash value. It wasn't gold, it didn't sparkle, and you couldn't trade it for anything, but it meant way more. It was a gift from the gods, a living symbol of immortal glory. Winning at Olympia meant your name would be remembered forever. It meant you'd return home a hero. Your statue might get placed in a temple. Poets could write verses in your honor. Sometimes cities even gave champions lifelong perks, free meals, theater seats, or public office. But the games weren't about the prizes. They talked about arete, the Greek idea of virtue and excellence. Owning arete meant fulfilling your purpose, reaching the peak of human potential. For athletes, that meant winning, nothing else. The competition was brutal. Victory wasn't just personal, it was political. Every athlete represented their city. Winning at Olympia showed not only your strength, but the strength and honor of your people. Glory belonged to everyone. That made victory even more important, and failure even more bitter. No room for excuses or do-overs. The line between eternal fame and complete obscurity could be measured by a breath, a stumble, a moment of hesitation. For those who didn't win, no celebrations or awards awaited. They quietly went home, usually forgotten by history, but the winners stood apart, crowned in silence. Their wreaths caught the light. They became part of something sacred. The Greeks believed people like that were touched by the gods. They didn't just run faster than their rivals. They pleased the gods in a world with no medals or sponsors. This fragile crown of olive leaves meant everything, because for the Greeks, immortality didn't come from wealth. It came from being remembered. The first Olympic Games were held in 776 BC. There was only one event, a sprint called the stadion. It was a run about 192 meters long, basically the length of the stadium. No starting blocks, no shoes, no false start penalties, just barefoot runners on packed earth. A straight line marked between two posts, and silence before the referee's signal. The runners leaned forward, dust kicked up, then they ran. The first Olympic champion recorded in history was a cook named Koi Boss of Elis, a humble man whose note echoed for thousands of years just for being the fastest. His prize, not money, not power, just an olive wreath and a spot on the Olympic winners list. Over time, the games expanded. By the 7th century BC, many new events were added. Dolos, a double-length race. Doichos, a long-distance run. Then wrestling, discus throw, javelin, and long jump. All parts of a brutal all-around test. To win, you had to be fast, strong, agile, and smart. One of the most amazing additions was pancration, a deadly combo of wrestling and boxing with almost no rules. Everything was allowed except biting and eye gouging. Men left, the arena bloodied and battered. Some even died, but if you won, you became unstoppable, living legend. Then came the chariot race, the pounding hooves around the hippodrome, clouds of dust, shattered wheels, horses and drivers tumbling. These races were dangerous, chaotic, and wildly popular. The chariots, a deadly combo of wrestling and boxing with almost no rules. Everything was allowed except biting and eye gouging. Men left, the arena bloody and aching. Some even died, but if you won, you became unstoppable as living legend. Then came the chariot races. Hooves thundered around the track. Clouds of dust rose. Wheels shattered. Horses and drivers tumbled. These races were dangerous, chaotic, and wildly popular. These chariots, weren't driven by the athletes themselves, but by hired charioteers. However, the horse owners, not the drivers, were crowned kings of status, but in 776 BC, it was just the first race, one event, one winner, a beginning. From that single contest, a movement was born, a way to worship the physical body as divine, pushing it beyond limits and turning sports into more than just a game. It became a ritual, an honor, and as years passed and new events got added, the original race, the stadium, remained the heartbeat of the games because everything Olympics started with a sprint. The Olympics weren't just competitions, they were ceremonies. Every race, every throw, every moment of sweat happened under the watchful eyes of the gods. At Olympia, sports were sacred, and at the center of it all was Zeus, king of Mount Olympus and the game's patron god. Before the contests kicked off, this huge sacrifice was held at Zeus's altar. This wasn't just for show, it was the main event. Dozens of bulls were slaughtered to honor the god, their ashes piled high on an altar built entirely from the remains of past sacrifices. This holy pile of ashes grew over centuries, thanks to the devotion of athletes and priests. To compete at Olympia, athletes had to swear a solemn oath at Zeus's temple, placing their hand on a slab of meat. They promised honest training, fair play, and no embarrassing the games. Cheating wasn't just dishonorable, it was blasphemy. Offenders risked fines, beatings, or even permanent bans. Their names could be chiseled onto bronze statues of Zeus by Zay at the stadium entrance as a warning. Here lie the god offenders. The game's overseers were the Hellenodikai, judges picked from the region of Elis. They weren't just referees, they were priests, guardians of both rules and rituals. They trained for 10 months before the games, learning not only sports standards but also religious rites. They wore purple robes and carried staffs, symbols of their sacred authority. And then there was the Temple of Zeus, one of the largest and grandest temples in the Greek world. Inside stood a statue over 40 feet tall, crafted by the sculptor Phidias, made of ivory and gold, seated on his throne, holding a scepter and a statue of Nike, the goddess of victory. Zeus watched the games with a calm, eternal gaze. This masterpiece was so stunning that it later became known as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Every jump, every hit, every drop of sweat was a form of worship. At Olympia, bodies moved to a divine rhythm. Victory wasn't just pride, it was for Zeus in ancient Olympia. The air was thick with competition, ritual, and the scent of olive oil. But one thing was painfully clear: no women allowed. The Olympics were men only, not just in competition, but in attendance. Married women were banned from watching. Legend says the punishment was death specifically, being thrown off Mount Typean. This reflected the deeply patriarchal structure of Greek society, where public life, especially sacred and athletic spaces, belonged to men. The games celebrated the ideal male form. Nudity was the norm, and the contests were not just athletic but philosophical. The trained, disciplined male body was seen as a reflection of cosmic order, a living sculpture of virtue. Women, especially married ones, had no place in this visual and symbolic world. However, not all women were completely erased from Olympic lore. Unmarried women were sometimes allowed to watch, and they had their own event, the Heraean Games. held to honor Hera, Zeus's wife. These games featured a race for young girls, held at the same stadium but with some key differences. The races were shorter. The girls ran in normal clothes, wearing short tunics that left one shoulder bare. Their hair was loose and free, not tied up. Winners received olive wreaths and could dedicate statues to Hera. But even though the Heraean Games mattered, they weren't the Olympics. The Olympics remained a sacred male ritual tied to Zeus and military values. Strength, endurance, and glory were all training for the battlefield, mixing up with the arena. Winning at the Olympics meant you were a hero to the polis, a role Greek women were strictly not invited to play. There was one glaring exception, though: Caniska from Sparta, a wealthy lady who bred horses. Since chariot races crowned the owner, not the driver, technically Caniska became the first female Olympic champion. But even she never set foot in the stadium to watch her victory. Excluding women wasn't just custom, it was religious law, social rule, and cultural identity all mashed together. At Olympia, the games had plenty going on, but none of it was for women. In ancient Greece, winning at Olympia wasn't just a personal brag, it was political capital. Victory brought honor not just to the athlete, but to their whole polis. Every athlete was a walking billboard for their hometown. Winning meant you were top dog in strength, discipline, and divine favor. That superiority reflected back on the society that raised you. When an Olympic champ came home, he got treated like a hero. City gates opened to honor him. Crowds lined the streets. Songs were sung. His name might be carved in stone or immortalized by poets. One famous poet, Pindar, wrote intricate victory odes full of fancy language and mythology, commissioned by cities to honor their champs. But the party didn't stop at applause. Winners often got gifts: land, cash, free meals for life, tax breaks, or even statues in public squares. In some cities, they scored VIP seats at the theater or front row spots at political meetings. They could even be elected to office, not because of their speeches, but because of their bodies and what they'd proven at Olympia. Some wealthy elites used the Olympics to boost their status. They sponsored training programs, backed athletes, or even bred horses for chariot races, where the owner, not the driver, won the prize. For this aristocracy, an Olympic win was basically a political election victory. It boosted their legacy, amped their influence, and shaped how history remembered them. Even city-state rivalries played out through sports. When Athens and Sparta clashed politically or militarily, they also kept score on the field. Who had more winners? Who trained harder? Which gods were backing whose policies? Victory was a message. We're stronger. Our way is better. In this way, the Olympics became a diplomatic stage, a battlefield of symbolic warfare where cities competed for glory without bloodshed. The olive wreath might look humble, but in ancient Greece, it carried the weight of political power, cultural pride, and immortal memory. For over 1,000 years, the Olympic Games thrived in ancient Greece. Every 4 years, athletes, poets, priests, and fans made the pilgrimage to Olympia not for profit, but for glory, devotion, and unity. But nothing in history lasts forever. In 393 AD, Emperor Theodosius, a Christian convert, ordered the ancient games shut down. To him, they were pagan rituals out of step with Christianity's growing power in the Roman world. Temples closed, altars dismantled, statues vandalized, Zeus's sacred flame went out. The stadium fell silent. Centuries passed. Olympia became ruins, slowly swallowed by time and nature. The racetracks were reclaimed by the wild. Voices faded. The names of champions were forgotten, except for a dusty few recorded in ancient scrolls. But the idea never truly died. In the 19th century, archaeologists uncovered Olympia's bones columns, temples, training grounds. Interest sparked again. To end the ancient games. To him, they were pagan rituals, ill-suited to Christianity's rising dominance in the Roman world. Temples got shut down, altars dismantled, statues wrecked, the sacred flame of Zeus snuffed out. The stadium went silent. Centuries slipped by. Olympia turned into a pile of rubble, slowly swallowed by time and nature. The racetrack got overgrown. Voices faded away. The names of champions mostly forgotten, except for a dusty few scribbled in old scrolls. But that idea never really died in the 19th century. When archaeologists dug up Olympia's bones columns, temples, training grounds, interest sparked once more. What if the games could come back, not just curiosity, but a global symbol? In 1896, that dream became real. The modern Olympic Games were born in Athens, thanks to Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who believed sports could bring nations together in peace, kind of like how sports once bonded the Greeks at Olympia. He borrowed old traditions, the 4-year cycle, the flame, the athlete parade, even the ideal of arete. That perfect mix of body and spirit got a revival. Today, the Olympic torch is lit in Olympia, beneath the ruins of the temple, using parabolic mirrors and sunlight, just like ancient times. From there, it journeys across continents, a flame linking past and present. Although modern games are global, commercial, and fiercely competitive, their heart still beats to an ancient rhythm honoring human potential, peace, and striving for something bigger than just winning. From sacred Olympia to stadiums worldwide, the Olympic spirit lives on not as a relic, but a living tradition. The sacred flame never truly went out. It was passed on. The story of the Colossus didn't start with bronze or art. It started with a siege and a city that refused to fall back in 305 BC. The island city was under siege by one of the most fearsome military minds of the Hellenistic world, Demetrius Thais of Macedon, aka the Besieger. He arrived with a massive army of tens of thousands, backed by warships, catapults, and a notorious siege tower called Helpless, a 9-story mobile fortress. Meanwhile, the city's roads were narrow, a proud naval city, rich from trade and savvy diplomacy, but no match for Demetrius's power. His goal: destroy the roads linking the city to Egypt, the rival power of the Ptolemies. Supposed to be a quick campaign. Nope. Nearly a year later, the Rhodians held their lines. They used terrain, walls, and brains at night. They snuck out to burn siege equipment. They cut supply lines. They adapted faster than Demetrius could keep up. Even when those giant helpless towers moved in, they found ways to disable them, dousing them with oil and setting them ablaze. Finally, the siege collapsed. Demetrius retreated in disgrace, leaving behind broken war machines and shattered pride. The city was saved. Its people, scarred but unbroken, now wanted to make sure no one forgot. The Rhodians gathered the remains. of the siege-abandoned towers, busted catapults, and thousands of pounds of bronze and iron, they weren't going to waste it. They melted it down, reforged it, and gave it new life, not as weapons, but as a monument to mark their unbelievable victory. They chose to honor their patron god, Helios, the sun god. They planned a statue, not just any statue, not even just grand, but colossal, something the world had never seen. They commissioned Chairs of Lindos, a sculptor known for precision and ambition. He promised not just a statue, but a symbol, a bold statement. The roads are high, the roads are free, and so, from the ashes of war, the giant figure rose, not a miracle, but a defiant act, with victory fresh. And the giant didn't just show up as some kind of miracle, it was a full-on power move, fresh off their win and riding a wave of pride. The people of Rhodes set their sights on a project unlike anything the world had ever seen. They decided to build a statue, not just to celebrate their resistance, but to send a message across the sea. Forged in bronze and standing tall on stone, they picked Helios, the sun god, who they believed had their city's back during the siege. Along the way, Helios wasn't just some random, he was the guardian, a presence tied to the island's identity. His rays lit up every rock in the harbor, and now he would take shape to turn that vision into reality. They called upon Charis of Lindos, a native Rhodian and a master sculptor. Charis was trained under Leucippus, the famous sculptor of Alexander the Great. He knew all about proportions, symmetry, and ambition. His task was colossal, literally. The Colossus would stand over 100 feet tall, almost as tall as a modern 10-story building. It would be made entirely of bronze, with iron and stone supports. These materials came straight from the siege engines Demetrius left behind. Thousands of pounds of bronze from melted down weapons and armor would become the god's skin. What once threatened the streets would now protect them. Construction began around 292 BC and took 12 years to finish. The process was slow and careful. The statue was built from scratch, with each piece carefully cast, assembled and reinforced as the structure rose. Workers toiled under the blazing sun, shaping metal, aligning joints, and creating what would become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. We don't know exactly what it looked like. No ancient images survive, but it's believed Helios stood upright, maybe shading his eyes with one hand looking east, or raising an arm. In victory, a calm face crowned by a radiant halo of sun rays. It wasn't just art, not just religion, it was identity, forged from the relics of war. The Colossus wasn't just a statue, it was a reminder to everyone entering the harbor that this city stood strong and its light would never go out. When the Colossus was finally completed around 280 BC, it was more than just a statue, it was a statement. Standing over 30 meters tall, the Colossus was the tallest statue in the ancient world. Built entirely from bronze plates over an iron and stone frame, it dominated the skyline and amazed every sailor who sailed into the harbor. Although later legends said it stood at the harbor entrance, with ships sailing between its legs, historians and engineers agree that was structurally impossible. Instead, the statue was likely placed to the side of the harbor, maybe atop a stone pedestal, visible from afar. Its bronze body sparkled under the sun, the pointed crown shining with the divine rays of the sun god. The engineering behind it was truly extraordinary. Each bronze plate was carefully shaped and fitted, locked onto a hidden frame to keep the giant stable. Weight was evenly distributed, joints cleverly concealed. The statue could be built using earth ramps, gradually raised as construction climbed higher, then removed once it was done. Helios could stand tall, calm, one hand on his hip, the other raised, maybe waving or holding a torch. His face serene, youthful, and idealized, true to Greek artistic tradition. His gaze faced the sea, watching sailors and merchants enter the harbor. But the Colossus was not just a guardian. He was a symbol of the Rhodian people. Helios stood for freedom, resilience, and divine favor. His towering figure declared to the world that Rhodes not only survived the siege, but grew stronger. The city had taken weapons of war and turned them into monuments of peace. Visitors stood there in awe. The statue wasn't just tall, it seemed eternal. Sunlight danced on its bronze surface. Its shadow stretched over the harbor walls, and, for a moment, standing beneath it, you could almost believe the gods were walking among. Figure, standing beneath him, you'd almost believe the gods were just casually strolling among humans. With Helios, the Rhodes built its pride and cast it in bronze for a dazzling 12 years. The Colossus wasn't just a statue, it was a flare lighting up the ancient world, signaling a new era for the city's port. This city, long a melting pot of cultures and trade, suddenly found itself the toast of the international scene. With Helios towering over the harbor, the roads became a beacon, literally and figuratively, for merchants and envoys alike, and poets dropping by. The giant made it clear this island was way more than a naval fortress. It was a rising cultural powerhouse. The statue changed how the public saw themselves. The Rhodians weren't just survivors of a siege anymore. They were the chosen ones. Under the sun, God's protection, boosted by victory and destined for greatness. Helios wasn't just some temple god. Now he was a presence watching from the skyline. The Colossus's image soon showed up on Rhodian coins, minted and spread all over the Mediterranean. Helios, crowned with radiant rays, became the pride and prosperity symbol for the Rhodians. Inscriptions praising the Colossus started circulating. Visitors wrote about how the sun's rays reflected on his bronze skin at dawn, bathing the harbor in golden light. Culturally, the city's streets were buzzing. It became a hub for philosophers, sculptors, and orators. Schools of rhetoric popped up. Statues lined the squares. Art, politics, and religion blended into a polished civic identity with the Colossus at its heart. But the statue's meaning went beyond the city limits. It was a universal symbol of resilience in the face of impossible odds. A statue forged from enemy weapons, gifted to the god of light, visible to every sailor at sea. It reminded Greeks everywhere that power can rise from pain. Peace, once won, can be shaped into beauty. For some, this giant statue was sacred harmony, a city, and a god perfectly matched. For others, proof that even in times of war and conquest, you can still build something inspiring instead of just tearing things down. And for the Rhodians, it was simply their victory, their god, their promise from the heavens. The Colossus wasn't just a marvel, it was hope cast in bronze. In 226 BC, just over a decade after the Colossus was finished, the ground beneath the streets started to shake. Out of nowhere, a massive earthquake hit the island. Houses collapsed, the sun cracked open, Harbor walls shuddered, and then, with metal groaning and skyward screams. Helios's majestic statue, the city's pride, broke at the knees and toppled. This giant didn't just fall like a tree. It shattered, twisted as it fell. First, the legs snapped. The upper body slammed to the ground, scattering. Bronze chunks, fingers as big as men, crumbled. The head that once looked out to sea now faced down into the dirt. Nobody saw it coming, and nobody could stop it. Streets were badly damaged, but nothing broke the people's hearts more than losing their god's image. The giant had become more than a statue. It was a companion, a symbol of divine favor. Now it was destroyed, its ruins scattered across the city's sacred ground. Yet even in ruin, it remained a wonder for centuries after the quake. Visitors still came to see what was left. Historian Strauss wrote about this shattered giant, describing the massive remains. People stood under the broken branches of the bridge, amazed by the feat it once required. Fingers thicker than a man's torso, bronze ribs curved like forgotten armor. Inside, they saw the iron framework and brilliant designs of a civilization hell-bent on defying its enemies. Some thought the fall was divine punishment. Others saw it as a reminder that even glory must bow to nature. But most Rhodians, despite their pain, refused to erase it. Though shattered, the Colossus stayed sacred. They left the shards where they fell, and for 800 years after, those fragments lingered, silent, rusting, colossal, a fallen god, a shattered wonder, yet somehow more human in its brokenness than it ever was in its flawless prime. This statue once shouted strength. Now it whispers impermanence. And honestly, that's kind of sacred too. After the dust settled and the grief quieted down, the question crept back up like morning fog on the road. Should we rebuild it? The fallen giant still lay scattered on the ground, its shiny bronze skin glinting under the sun. Broken limbs spread out like a giant dude napping on the earth. Plenty of locals wanted to restore it. After all, it was their symbol, their guardian, their pride. But others hesitated, and so, like so many times before, the Rhodians turned to a voice older than their city itself, the Delphic Oracle. The Oracle's answer, pretty terrifying. The gods have spoken. She said, the Colossus's fall was no accident. It was a sign. Helios was displeased, and rebuilding the statue would only stir divine wrath. The Rhodians, deeply spiritual and careful not to offend their patron god, took the warning seriously. They abandoned the idea, but there were practical reasons too. Rebuilding a statue that size meant tons of resources, materials, labor, and time. The original Colossus took 12 years to build. The costs were covered by war spoils and donations from allies. But now the economy had shifted. The political scene was shakier. Roads faced new threats, and alliances changed. Rebuilding a statue, no matter how iconic, just didn't seem smart in such uncertain times. So the decision was made. Let it rest. Centuries later, the Colossus still lay there, piece by piece, but it was never forgotten. The ruins became a kind of open-air museum. Pilgrims, poets, traders, and scholars all came to tour the remains. They walked among the giant ribs of the statue. They touched the splayed bronze fingers. They marveled at its shattered face. Even in destruction, There was awe, and maybe that's why the roads never raised it again, because sometimes a fallen wonder speaks louder than one standing tall. Sometimes ruins become a kind of memory humble, teaching, and lasting longer than glory. The Rhodians didn't rebuild because they didn't have to. The Colossus had done its job. It became legend. And legends don't need bronze legs to stand. Though the Colossus collapsed, its fame just kept ringing out. Over the centuries, the ruined statue became legendary, not despite its destruction, but because of it. Visitors from all over the Mediterranean kept coming to those roads, not to see a standing monument, but to witness a fallen wonder. The Greek historian Strabo, writing nearly 2 centuries later, vividly described what was left. He spoke of bronze fingers longer than a man, hollow limbs as big as towers, and a shattered form, still shaped like a god, even as rubble. The Colossus inspired awe. It became a place for reflection, proof that even the greatest works can fall. What stood firm before the eyes of visitors? The statue was no longer a statue, but a giant ghost, lying silent beneath the sun. Unlike other wonders worldwide, the Colossus wasn't destroyed by war or hatred. It wasn't toppled by invaders or melted in divine fury. Nature took it down an earthquake, blind and indifferent, reminding humanity of its limits. Yet what remained was treated with respect. The Rhodians never melted it down or swept it away. They left the ruins where they fell, letting time, wind, and memory weave. Something sacred in the ancient world. The 7 wonders weren't just lists, they were pilgrimages. It had to be something sacred in the ancient world. The 7 wonders weren't just bucket list stops, they were pilgrimages. And these roads, though the statues lay scattered, became one of those holy destinations, alongside the towering lighthouse of Alexandria and the hanging gardens of Babylon. The ruined giant still held its ground. It was different, darker, more human. The other wonders dazzled with grandeur. The Colossus now whispered something quieter, tinged with melancholy. It showed the passage of time. It murmured about ambition, fragility, and the strange beauty of collapse. It taught us a truth: perfection is impossible. Even broken things can be remembered. Sometimes the leftover pieces are even more powerful than the whole. So visitors kept coming. They stood among the rubble, traced the bronze edges with their fingers, imagining the day when Helios once looked down on the harbor, radiant and unyielding. The wonder still existed. It just changed shape. For over 8 centuries, the shattered giant lay there, worn down by sun and wind, admired by pilgrims and poets alike. Generation after generation stood in its shadow, dreaming of the towering figure it once was. And then, just like that, it vanished. In 654 AD, Rhodes fell to the army of. The city collapsed, along with the last visible ruins of the giant statue, according to later Byzantine historians. The conquerors saw the statue's massive remains more as raw material than memory. Word is the bronze was melted down and sold to a traveling Syrian merchant who hauled it away, piece by piece, carried on the backs of 900 camels, whether that number's exaggerated or not. The message was clear. The giant of the roads was gone. No shards, no hands or ribs to touch, no sky-high skeleton of a fallen god left behind. The statue that once guarded the harbor, once symbolized resistance and identity, now only lived on in words, But those words, pretty powerful stuff, writers kept listing it as one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, alongside surviving relics, temples, pyramids, and tombs. The Colossus, though physically missing, still haunted the collective imagination of the world. Its image morphed through cultures. Medieval maps showed it straddling the harbor. A bronze gate ships sailed beneath. Renaissance artists painted it as a giant casting, its shadow over the ocean. It became a symbol of what once was and what might come back. Ironically, we know almost nothing about its real look. No blueprints, no sculptures or carvings survived. All we believe about the Colossus comes from echoes of travelers, historians' pages, and the imaginations of latecomers. But maybe that's why it endures, because the giant of the roads wasn't just a statue, it was a metal-forged dream, a vision of what humanity could build when courage, beauty, and purpose mixed. And though its body may be gone, its shadow stretches across time. The Colossus no longer stands tall, but its meaning has never crumbled. More than 2,000 years after falling, it's etched deep in the world's imagination, not as rubble, not as loss, but as a symbol. It's not just height, engineering, or bronze. It's about what people see when they look up: strength and defiance, beauty and resilience, pride shining through, built from spoils. The Colossus began as a statement that roads, no matter how small, can't be broken. The locals turned siege tools into art. What was meant to destroy them became a monument to their endurance, an idea outlasting the statue itself throughout history. Echoes of stories about the Statue of Liberty have popped up again and again. When France gifted the Statue of Liberty to the U.S., it wasn't just diplomacy, it was a tribute to the same ideal that a towering statue by the harbor could welcome the world and stand for. Something bigger than stone or steel in modern times. Engineers and artists have dreamed of rebuilding the Statue of Liberty. Some imagine a new statue with solar panels honoring Helios sustainably. Others picture a modern wonder made of glass and light floating on the sea. None have come true yet, but the fact we still dream of rebuilding it says it all, because the Statue of Liberty isn't just its own history. It stands for the kind of monument humanity craves, not for kings or conquests, but for possibility. The idea that from destruction, something brilliant can rise, that even if toppled, a nation's spirit remains in every fallen empire, a tribute to the same ideal that a towering statue by the harbor could welcome the world and stand for. Something greater than stone or steel. In modern times, engineers and artists have pitched rebuilding the Statue of Liberty. Some dream of a new statue decked out with solar panels, giving a nod to Helios in a sustainable style. Others imagine a modern wonder made of glass and light, floating on the sea. Nothing's happened yet, but the fact we still dream of rebuilding it says it all, because the Statue of Liberty isn't just about its own history. It stands for the kind of monument humanity craves to build, not for kings or conquest, but for possibility, for the idea that out of destruction, something brilliant can rise, for the belief that even when toppled, the spirit of a people remains in every fallen empire and every city rising anew, in every monument built after war, in every torch raised high by the harbor. The Statue of Liberty still stands. It lives in stories, in symbols, and in the space between us and what we dare to build. Roads may be silent now, but in the minds of those who remember, a bronze god still watches over every wave, and even broken, he shines on, still watching every single wave, and even broken, the man still shines bright.